The fluorescent lights in the hospital break room buzzed just loud enough to make your teeth ache if you sat there too long. I'd been on my feet for 11 hours. My scrubs smelled like antiseptic and cold coffee. I was eating a granola bar that had probably expired sometime around the last election when my phone lit up with a text from my brother-in-law. "Hey, the guys are doing a poker night Friday. Tell my sister you can't make it. She won't listen to me." That was it. No hello. No, how's your shift going? Just an assumption, delivered as a fact, that whatever I had planned needed to move aside for his poker night. I stared at the screen for a moment, then put my phone face down on the table and finished my granola bar. My husband's family had never quite figured out what to do with me. His mother was polite in the way that people are polite when they're waiting for you to become someone else. His sister, Tatum, was the one who actually liked me, or at least she tried. But his brother, whose name I will say only once, was Reeves. And Reeves had decided about 45 minutes after we first met that I was a footnote in his brother's life. I understood, in the abstract, why. My husband, Walt, came from a family where the men were loud and the women were organizational. His dad had been an engineer. Reeves had gone into finance. Walt had done electrical contracting, worked his way up, started his own company at 32. They were a family of builders, fixers, doers, and they announced themselves as such, constantly. I had not announced myself as anything. I was a registered nurse going on 8 years. I worked cardiac ICU. I had seen people come back from things that would make most people's hair go white. I didn't talk about it much, not because I was ashamed, but because the people who needed to know already knew, and the people who didn't need to know would either not believe it or get squeamish at dinner. Reeves fit into the second category. The first time I met him at a family birthday party in Naperville, he'd asked me what I did. I told him. He nodded with the expression of a man who has just learned that a piece of furniture speaks. "That's a tough job," he said, and then turned to Walt and started talking about the Bears. I went to get more potato salad. Walt and I had been together 6 years, married for 3. We'd met on a Tuesday when he came to fix the electrical panel in my apartment building, and I'd been the only tenant awake at 7 a.m. to let the building super in. We stood in the hallway for 20 minutes while he worked, and I drank my coffee. And somehow we ended up talking about the Cubs, and then about the fact that neither of us actually liked baseball, and then about everything else. He was not the kind of man who needed to be the loudest person in the room. That was, I think, why we worked. But Reeves was a different animal entirely. Reeves needed audience. He needed confirmation. He ran his mouth about stock picks and bracket predictions, and the one time he'd gone deep-sea fishing in the Gulf and caught something large enough to photograph. He gave advice nobody asked for. He prefaced sentences with "here's the thing," and "listen, what you need to understand is." He had decided, somewhere along the way, that I was Walt's wife, which meant I was a supporting character, which meant my opinion on anything substantive was decorative at best. The worst part was that he wasn't cruel about it. He was dismissive in the cheerful, oblivious way that people are when it genuinely doesn't occur to them that you might know something they don't. The poker night text was in March. The thing that finally broke open happened in June. Walt's mother had been having some chest pains. She'd mentioned it to Reeves first, which was a mistake on her part because Reeves immediately went into full authority mode. He called her cardiologist directly, a doctor she'd been seeing for 12 years, and then reported back to the family at Sunday dinner like he'd been dispatched on a diplomatic mission. "So I talked to Dr. Fenner," he said, loading up his plate with my mother-in-law's pot roast. "And here's the thing. They're going to run a stress test, maybe look at her calcium score, see what's going on with the arterial situation." My mother-in-law looked quietly pleased that someone was managing things. Tatum nodded. Walt caught my eye across the table. I said nothing. Reeves was not wrong, exactly. He just said everything with the confidence of a man who had Googled something on the drive over and was now explaining it to a room. After dinner, my mother-in-law pulled me aside in the kitchen while I was helping with the dishes. "What do you think?" she said quietly. "About what Reeves said, about the stress test." She nodded. I set down the dish towel. I kept my voice even and practical, the way I do when I'm at work. I told her that a stress test made sense as a first step, but that given her age and the nature of what she'd been describing, which she'd also told me about, separately 2 weeks earlier, I thought she might want to ask specifically about an echocardiogram. I told her what to ask for and why. I told her which symptoms to report as urgent and which ones to watch but not panic about. I told her to trust her gut if something felt off, and to call me anytime, day or night, no matter what shift I was working. She looked at me for a moment with an expression I hadn't seen from her before, something softer than her usual politeness. "You know a lot about this," she said. "It's what I do," I said, and I smiled and handed her the pot roast pan to put away. The thing about hidden competence is that you don't hide it on purpose, usually. You just don't lead with it. You wait for the context that requires it. The context arrived on a Thursday in late June, in the form of my brother-in-law's friend. Reeves had organized a cookout. He did this a few times a summer, an informal thing at his house in Elmhurst, a perfectly maintained colonial with a gas grill, the size of a small vehicle, and a garage full of things he'd bought and used. He'd invited Walt and me, Tatum and her boyfriend, his work friends, the neighbors. There were maybe 25 people there by 4 in the afternoon. One of Reeves's work friends, I'll call him by the name everyone used, which was Marsh, short for something longer, was a man in his early 40s who had the particular energy of someone who had been told he was intelligent so many times that he'd stopped questioning it. He worked in private equity. He had opinions about wine. He had recently, apparently, gotten very interested in health and fitness, which meant he was describing his morning routine to anyone who would hold still long enough. He and I ended up near the veggie tray at the same time. "So you're Walt's wife," he said. "I am," I said. "What do you do?" I told him. His face did the saying Reeves's had done 6 years ago, the polite nod, the mild recalibration. "That's great," he said. "Really important work." The tone of a man tipping a valet. Then he said, "I've actually been getting really into biohacking lately, tracking HRV, doing cold plunges, the whole thing. I've basically optimized my cardiovascular system at this point. My resting heart rate is 52. "That's good," I said. "I did a lot of research," he said. "I think most people just don't understand what their hearts are actually doing." I picked up a piece of cucumber. I figured out that the whole cholesterol narrative is actually a lot more complicated than what doctors tell you, he said. Like, the LDL thing is kind of a myth. It's more about particle size. I kept my expression neutral. This was a thing I had learned to do over years of night shifts, of exhausted families, of people who needed me steady when nothing else was. "And inflammation is really the root cause," he continued, "which is why I cut out seed oils." I said, Reeves had drifted over during this, holding a bottle of craft IPA. "Marsh is really into this stuff," he said, in the tone of someone introducing an attraction. "He's done a ton of research. I can tell," I said. "You should hear his take on statins," Reeves said. I looked at Reeves. I looked at Marsh. I thought about my mother-in-law asking me quietly in the kitchen what she should do. I thought about the 11 years I had spent watching what hearts actually do when they give up. I thought about the night, about 4 years ago, when I had caught a medication error that would have killed a 63-year-old retired teacher from Oak Park, and I had caught it at 2 a.m. on a double shift, and I had done it because I was very good at my job, and because I paid attention to things that other people assumed someone else was handling. I said, "What's his take on statins?" Marsh turned, pleased to have an audience. He began. He was 3 sentences in when I said gently, "Where are you getting that data?" He paused. There's a lot of research on it. I've read a lot of. Which studies? I said. Are you talking about the Jupiter trial? The improv IT data? Or are you working from something more recent? Marsh blinked. I kept my voice level, conversational. The way I am at 4 a.m., when I need a family to understand something important, and panic won't help any of us. The particle size argument is real, but it's more nuanced than the way it's usually presented in wellness content. LDLP versus LDLC is a meaningful distinction, but it doesn't nullify the statin evidence for high-risk patients. The inflammation piece is also real. HSCRP is a genuinely useful marker, but the mechanism is more complicated than seed oils. Silence. Reeves had gone very still. I'm not saying your routine doesn't work for you, I said to Marsh. A 52 resting heart rate is legitimately good. But the leap from personal biometrics to the cholesterol narrative is a myth, is a long one. And in cardiac ICU, I see what happens when people make that leap and stop their medication. Marsh opened his mouth, closed it. Cardiac ICU, he said. Going on 8 years, I said. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Which, I suppose, he was. From somewhere behind me, I heard Reeves say, quietly, to no one in particular, she knows a lot about this. Walt found me later by the cooler, getting a water. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just stood next to me with his arm around my shoulders, looking out at the backyard. You enjoyed that, he said. I really did not say anything that wasn't true, I said. I know, he said. That's why you enjoyed it. I laughed. I couldn't help it. The shift that happened after that cookout was not dramatic. It wasn't a single conversation where Reeves apologized and everything changed. Life doesn't work like that, mostly. But things moved. A week later, my mother-in-law had her echo. She called me after, not Reeves. She told me what the cardiologist said. She asked me what questions to ask at the follow-up. We talked for 40 minutes. At the end of the call, she said, I don't know why I never came to you first, I said. You can always come to me. I know that now, she said. 2 weeks after the cookout, Reeves texted me, directly, not through Walt, to ask about something his own doctor had said about his blood pressure. It was a real question, asked seriously, without the performance of authority he usually wore. I answered him the same way I'd answer anyone. Clearly, practically, without making him feel stupid for not knowing. He texted back, that actually makes a lot more sense than what the pamphlet said. Thanks. I stared at that text for a long moment. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a reckoning. But it was something. It was a man who had never once thought to ask me a real question, asking me one. It was the first time in 6 years that he'd reached out, not because he needed something logistical or social, but because he needed someone who actually knew. I put my phone in my pocket and went back to my patient. I still work cardiac ICU. I still come home with scrubs that smell like antiseptic. I still eat questionable granola bars in the break room at whatever hour my body has lost track of. I don't need a room to know I matter. I don't need Marsh to understand what I do, or for family dinners to become some kind of validation exercise. The people who trust me are the people who have needed me in the worst moments of their lives, and that is not nothing. But I will tell you this. The next Sunday dinner, when the conversation turned to health, as it does inevitably with a family that's getting older and watching each other more carefully, Reeves looked down the table at me and said, "What does she think?" He said it like it was obvious, like he'd been saying it for years. Walt's knee pressed against mine under the table. I looked up, and I told them what I thought, and everyone listened. It had only taken 6 years.